He was a slave who defied an empire, a gladiator who turned rebel, a Thracian whose name still echoes in the halls of resistance. This is the true story of Spartacus, a tale of freedom in a world built on chains. Spartacus was born in Thrace, likely around 111 BC. His exact birthplace remains unknown, but Roman sources confirm he was a Thracian. Thrace, a region that today spans parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. At the time, Thrace was a fractured land of independent tribes, some allied with Rome, others resisting it. By the late 2nd century BC, Rome had begun absorbing Thrace into its sphere through conquest, diplomacy, and forced alliances. Roman expansion wasn't just about land, it was about resources and people. Prisoners of war were regularly sold into slavery. Spartacus may have served in the Roman auxiliary, a non-citizen unit, before deserting. If so, it was not unusual. Rome often recruited and discarded Thracians, using them as expendable frontier troops. Desertion, however, was punishable by death or slavery. That's likely how he ended up in chains. At this time, around 73 to 71 BC, Rome was governed by elected officials called consuls and a powerful senate. There was no single ruler or emperor. This took place during the Roman Republic. To understand Spartacus, we must understand slavery in Rome. At its peak, slaves made up as much as 30 or 40% of Italy's population. They worked in fields, kitchens, workshops, and as tutors or concubines. But the most brutal fate awaited those sent to the gladiatorial schools. Capua's Ludus was one of many training centers where slaves were forged into fighters for public spectacle. Spartacus was sent there under the Lanista Lentulus Batiatus, whose school trained men for the bloody entertainment of the Roman elite. Gladiators were both feared and celebrated, living paradoxes in a society that saw them as property yet cheered them like heroes. In 73 BC, Spartacus and around 70 fellow gladiators revolted. Armed only with kitchen tools at first, they overpowered their guards and fled to Mount Vesuvius. This was not the first slave revolt. Two major ones had already shaken the Roman Republic in Sicily in the previous decades, but this one would become the most serious threat yet. From their camp on Vesuvius, they launched raids on Roman towns and estates. The movement quickly grew, drawing thousands of escaped slaves, rural, poor, and even former soldiers disillusioned with Rome. It wasn't just about Spartacus, it was a rebellion of the marginalized. The rebellion swelled to tens of thousands. Spartacus was not the only leader. He was joined by Crixus and Oenomaus, fellow gladiators. But Spartacus emerged as the most strategic mind. Spartacus rose at a time of great instability in Rome. The Republic was cracking under its own weight. Political violence had become routine, economic inequality was exploding, and generals like Sulla and Marius had turned Roman armies into private power blocks. In this chaos, Rome initially underestimated Spartacus. Local militias and ill-prepared consuls were sent to suppress him, and they failed. Spartacus, aided by leaders like Crixus and Oenomaus, defeated multiple Roman forces. Over 2 years, they defeated multiple Roman legions. Their tactics were not those of ragtag slaves. They showed strategic brilliance, ambushes, night raids, battlefield discipline. Spartacus himself is described as brave, intelligent, and humane, compared to many Roman commanders. What was Spartacus fighting for? Historians disagree. Some say he wanted to march his people north and escape over the Alps to freedom. Others believe he had more radical aims, to destroy the Roman system itself. We know he didn't loot indiscriminately. He forbade personal excess, punished those who abused civilians, and tried to maintain order. He even negotiated, or attempted to, with pirates to ferry his forces to safety. According to Plutarch, Spartacus struck a deal with Cilician pirates to transport his army to Sicily, a region with a history of major slave revolts. If he had succeeded, he might have reignited rebellion there, or used the island as a base of resistance. But the pirates betrayed him, taking payment and sailing off. The deal's collapse stranded his forces in southern Italy. This was more than a failed escape. It was a turning point. Trapped and unable to relocate, Spartacus lost strategic mobility. Romans seized the opportunity, walling him off with a massive trench and fortifications across the peninsula. The betrayal made Spartacus's eventual defeat almost inevitable. Was he a revolutionary? A pragmatist? A freedom fighter? The sources written by Roman elites don't tell us much. But his actions suggest a man deeply strategic, morally conscious, and aware of his symbolic role. Plutarch mentions that Spartacus had a wife, a Thracian seeress, who traveled with him and interpreted dreams and omens. She believed he was destined for greatness. Her name, like so many women of history, is lost. But her presence reminds us that this was not just a military campaign, it was a human story. The rebels weren't only soldiers, they were families, lovers, comrades, fugitives, trying to build something beyond the reach of empire. By 71 BC, the Senate panicked. They gave command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man and a ruthless commander. Crassus imposed brutal discipline on his own troops, reviving the ancient punishment of decimation, where every 10th soldier in a cowardly unit was executed. Then he trapped Spartacus's forces in the south by constructing a massive wall, a siege across the Italian peninsula. Spartacus broke through the blockade, but time was running out. Pompey, returning from Spain, was moving in from the north. The final battle came near the Silarus River. Spartacus is said to have killed his own horse before the fight, declaring he would either win or die as a free man. Spartacus fought fiercely and is believed to have died in battle, though his body was never found. In the aftermath, Rome crucified 6,000 of Spartacus's followers along the Appian Way, a line of death stretching from Capua to Rome. It was a brutal show of state power. The rebellion was crushed, but the memory of Spartacus endured. Rome survived, but it had been shaken. The rebellion revealed the fragility of a republic built on exploitation. Yet, despite the scale of the revolt, the Senate erased Spartacus from official memory. No monument was built, no histories were written in his honor, only fear remained. For nearly 2,000 years, Spartacus was a ghost, a name without a story. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, revolutionaries rediscovered him. The French Revolution saw him as a symbol of liberty. Karl Marx admired him as the ideal leader of a class revolt. In the 20th century, communists named brigades after him. Soviet statues were erected in his honor. And in 1960, Hollywood gave the world Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, a romanticized epic that introduced him to a new generation. Today, Spartacus stands at the intersection of history and myth. We know surprisingly little about his thoughts or feelings, but we know what he did, and that was enough. In a world where some men were born to rule and others to serve, Spartacus stood up and said no. That defiance, raw, dangerous, and unforgettable, is why his name lives on. He may have been crushed by empire, but he remains unconquered in memory.